shirt on. So you can give her questions. We're going to start off the forum with the pre-submitted community questions. Those questions were released online this afternoon, and so they're online, they've been sent to Twitter, they're on Facebook, and then we're also going to give them to the press as well. So, and those questions are in front of our panel members. And then you'll also have the chance to have your questions answered as well if they're not answered in the first part of our forum. So we're going to spend about the first 30 minutes answering the pre-submitted questions, and then the final 20 minutes or so will be community-submitted questions. We're going to let the members of the panel introduce themselves and say what their relationship is to the wetlands issue, what their area of expertise may be. And I'll urge you to help yourself to a beverage or a snack. And at the end of the meeting, we're actually celebrating the birthday of one of our members, Valencia. So that's the pretty cake back there. So again, thank you so much for coming, and I am going to turn things over to our host this evening, Herb Donaldson. We'll be videotaping this. Collaborative Theater has agreed to put together a video webcast, and we may have a follow-up radio show as well with some community interviews. We've been talking about trying to get that out there soon. So we have a few other things coming out where we're going to try to just get the information out into the community. So thank you very much, and you can away, sir.
Thank you, Rachel. Hello, everybody.
Hey, Aaron.
First of all, give yourselves a round of applause for being here and for showing up today. I had 3 questions when Rachel asked me to do this. The first question was, how many people turned you down before you asked me to moderate this? The second was, why did they turn you down? And the third is, why should I not turn you down? But I think she asked me to do this because I know very little about this. Very little about this. So I need for you to know, and also for all of you to know, that I am treating this as if I were a 5- or 6-year-old who had to write some sort of small paper for class tomorrow. So what I learned from this is hopefully going to be very educational, very informative. I've tried to gather as much as I could. I looked at the Wakulla News. I read some of the letters to the editor of the paper, and I also went on Facebook, which was very interesting. And so I'm still gathering information. And hopefully tonight some of the questions that you have here that will come later that everyone on this panel can answer will, I guess, open my eyes a little bit. So that's why I'm here. All right. But let's talk about the panel. If you could all introduce yourselves and your relation to the wetlands. Aisha, can we start with you?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. My name is Cliff Wilson. I'm the Assistant Director for Northwest Florida for the Department of Environmental Protection. I've got a Pensacola office, Panama City, and in Tallahassee. I had another gentleman that was going to be here to represent, so unlike the panel, I am not an expert on wetlands. I'm an administrator, but his wife got ill the last few days, and so he was not able to attend. But I'll be here to assist as much as I can. I can promise you I take very good notes, and if there's anything that we need to get back with you on, we'll be happy to do that. So please ask, whatever we can give assistance on.
Good evening, I'm Louis Serna. I'm the Planning and Community Development Director for Wakulla County. I've been in the position for about 2 years, but I have about 20 years of planning and permitting experience. About half of that time has been in the private sector as a consultant and permitting specialist, including in Wakulla County. So I do have the perspective of I have permitted development, and I've also reviewed development.
Hello, my name is Tabitha Frazier, and I'm one of Leon County's Soil and Water Conservation Supervisors. And I am a North Florida native. I grew up canoeing and hiking this area and fell in love and went to Florida State and majored in environmental studies and ended up going on to University of Florida where I mastered in environmental engineering where I specialized in wetland restoration because I knew how important this is to this area. And so I'm grateful to be here. I can answer questions about why wetlands are important, why the buffer zone is important, why Wakulla County went above the state standard because they care about their land, but I'll be able to help with any of that information.
I'm Jim Stoudermeyer. I did about just shy of 30 years with the Department of Environmental Protection, 17 of those years in the wetlands program. Roughly 10 of those years as either a deputy division or deputy bureau chief resource management, and I retired 2.5 years ago.
Now, you all have a list of questions in front of you. And I asked all of you to take a look at these questions, figure out which one that you feel you can better address. Has anybody picked out one that stands out to them?
I don't.
Before I try to pick one of those, I think it's important to make something clear to everybody.
Please.
The state and federal wetlands programs are wetlands permitting programs. We are in the business of reviewing applications to build things that infringe on wetlands and determining whether they can be built in accordance with statute and rule. Neither the state, nor the Corps of Engineers, nor the Northwest Florida Water Management District run a wetlands protection program. We want to run a permitting program. I used to comment back when I was employed gainfully, I never had a stamp that said denied for stupidity. We have to review everything that comes in the door and be perfectly candid. If an applicant has enough money and resources, almost anything can be permitted, whether it's a good project or not. I just want to get that out on the table up front.
I think I'd like to address the first question. I'll just read it out loud. But it says, when we are talking about wetlands and just building a few feet closer to the edge, why would the difference between 0 and 35 feet be important? For that matter, what would it make any difference between 35 feet and 75 feet? It seems that runoff and impact would not be much different either way. Can you please explain the reasoning and the difference it will make? Well, I just want to explain what a wetland buffer is. We know a wetland is totally wet. It's going to be a lake or stream or something. The buffer is the zone. It's an upland zone that has vegetation. And the reason it serves similar to a filter on a cigarette. If your mouth is the wetland and the filter is the buffer zone, the tobacco or the pollutants. There are so many sediments that are taken up by plants that are there that it also leaves habitats for birds to build nests. Often there are certain fish species that go in there. So the larger the buffer zone is, this creates a corridor. The greater the buffer zone, the more filtration, the larger animals that you can have in there. And the larger these zones, you actually can build connection corridors. There's animals that migrate between them. And I truly believe that the reason why Wakulla went above the state standard is because the bread and butter of this county is how beautiful it is. And we know that this county, the soil underneath of it is sandy. And whatever goes into the soil goes directly into our Florida aquaculture, the Florida aquaculture, and it also goes into Wakulla Springs. These are two things that are going to be polluted. Wakulla Springs was just upgraded. It's considered federally protected. It's considered polluted now. Wakulla County is required to clean up Wakulla Springs. Entering really this is just going to make it more of a problem. So I think that Wakulla County should continue to keep their buffer above state standards. This county is pristine compared to a lot of the other counties that we have in this state. And so to keep it a green county, I think would be wise.
Would anybody like to be quiet? Anybody else got pick a question for themselves over there?
I'd be glad to take any that deal with the wetlands ordinance and comprehensive plan language or permitting at the local level.
Okay, so can we take the one that says number 1?
Okay.
What is the difference between the wetlands ordinance and the current comprehensive plan language / why don't we just need comprehensive plan language like we have had since 1995?
Well, the wetlands ordinance really implements the policies of the comprehensive plan, and it provides more detail. One of the important things the wetlands ordinance does is that it establishes procedures by which our staff reviews for wetlands impacts. So it is important to have that ordinance in there. The buffers are from the comprehensive plan, 75-foot buffer that's broken down into a 35 and a 40-foot buffer are in the comprehensive plan, but they are mirrored in the wetlands ordinance. So that's basically the difference.
If the wetlands ordinance is repealed and the comp plan language is still in place, what effect would that have on buffer zones and variances? It is my understanding that there would be no variances and a strict 75-foot buffer would be put in place.
Yeah, and I'll take that one too, if you don't mind. The proposal, the direction of the board was actually to do away with the comprehensive plan language, not to repeal the ordinance, but just for sake of the question, if the ordinance went away, the ordinance does establish the process by which you can have variances. The comp plan, like most comprehensive plan language, provides general language that these are the buffers and this is what they shall be, and you may request variances subject to these guidelines. The ordinance gets into more detail, so it would probably not be a good idea to get rid of the ordinance and maintain the vague comprehensive plan language. But again, as I understand it, the proposal, the direction of the board, and the direction staff is headed in is to revise the buffer, or take out the buffer language in the comprehensive plan, and then we would come back later and revise the ordinance, not to get rid of everything in the ordinance, but to get rid of the buffer standards in the ordinance.
Is this making sense to all of you? Yes?
No, excuse me. I
Yes.
have a question here. Cynthia P. Shingles here. I noticed that
Can you write down, please? Because we're not good at the audience right now.
well, he did ask, did we have any
You're
questions?
starting trouble, Herb.
Oh, so I just have to do understood. But can you hold your question for a moment?
Yeah, what's your question?
Well, fine.
Popular vote. Okay.
Rachel, so why don't we switch up the plan a little bit? Let's switch up the plan a little bit. So please, ask your question.
No. Okay. I noticed that you're reading from all your paperwork and everything. So the wetland, from your own mind, not from what you notice that you have there on your hand, what are you saying here?
Well, the question, I guess, was,
No, don't look at your nose.
I'm trying to remind myself of what the question is. Again, the question is what would be the impact if we got rid of the ordinance and kept the comprehensive plan language? And that's not really what's being proposed, so I don't know whether it's useful for me to answer the question. I don't know if that makes sense to y'all, but again, to come back, the comprehensive plan provides the general guidelines for protection.
Why the door come back again, because you're still not answering.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be vague. I'm just trying to simplify it, I guess.
So wouldn't the direct answer to the question, regardless of what direction the board is going, if you repealed the ordinance and kept the comp plan, then you would be left with a comp plan and no implementation mechanism?
Generally, but we would still, those policies are still in
you'd
the
have to
comprehensive plan, yeah, and we would still have to enforce buffers.
Yeah.
And we just wouldn't have
But no process on paper.
the process, exactly, yes. Thank you.
I can't help it. Does that help at all with your question? Does that help at all with your question in the back?
No.
Okay. All right. Yes, Tabitha.
Something that I just like to kind of inform people about, and I discovered a little bit doing my research for this. I had just being someone that lives in this area, I had noticed that Wakulla County had required federal emergency management help with rain events. One was just Tropical Storm Debbie, not even a hurricane. And there were other significant rain events where it was considered a state of emergency down here in Wakulla. And so someone that deals with water issues up in Leon County, it did make me question why this was continuing to happen down here in Wakulla County with the ordinances that were in existence. Actually, Wakulla County has been flagged by FEMA because there has been so many FEMA claims and flood insurance claims from Wakulla County. Actually, the state of Florida accounts for 40% of all flood insurance claims in the country come from the state of Florida. Currently, right now, Wakulla County, every single wetland is being reassessed where the lines are because the federal government believes the lines weren't accurately done or that information is outdated, which is why homes continue to be flooded. Now, what this can eventually lead to is there's an interesting story here in Florida, and there's a gentleman in the audience that actually owns a home in a town called Caryville. And if you're traveling down I-10 towards Pensacola, there's still an exit for it. It's on the Choctawhatchee River. And Caryville was a town that consistently flooded when the Choctawhatchee River rose, and the residents continued to get FEMA money. It is the largest town purchased by FEMA in U.S. history. They actually bought out the residents because their homes were built in flood zones. Wakulla County right now is going to have the flood zone map is being reassessed currently. So, because so many homes are continuing to flood. So there's something to keep in mind that that's going to be happening irregardless of what the county procedures. The wetland, they're going to be reassessed. And so, just personally, I have a theory this is why the county is wanting to look at the buffer zone as something's going to be coming down on high to help protect the wetlands and stop from FEMA claims. And something to keep in mind, if you're attracting businesses down here to Wakulla County and you can't get insured, how much business is that going to attract? How many people are going to buy here when you can't be covered by insurance? You know, just something to keep in mind when the county goes forward with this vote.
Related to that,
Okay,
Don't
excuse me
confuse
again. You know what?
wetlands.
You don't have microphones, and I'm deaf. If you could speak up a little bit more, I could understand.
Okay.
You're speaking kind of low, okay?
Sure.
don't confuse wetlands with flood zones. Wetlands are areas that the vegetation is predominantly dependent on being wet. The soils are called hydric. They're what we call swamps, basically. But landward of that, on what we call uplands, people that live over in Sopchoppy well know this. When the Sopchoppy River floods, it's not the wetlands only that get wet. Town gets wet. People that are high and dry get real wet. So buffer zones give you a little bit more flood protection because the wetland can store a bit more water, but they still don't get you out of the flood zone. If FEMA goes to remap flood zones, that impacts on your flood insurance rates. Any of you that have been following the St. Pete Times is aware of the astronomical increases proposed for flood insurance. Orders of magnitude, $1,700 to add another zero per year.
It is very, and I think that we can all agree that even isolated wetlands serve as storage for flooding. Water goes there, it's better than being on asphalt. And so even if it's not a flood zone, isolated wetlands are just as important. They help with storage capacity and also help recharge the Florida aquifer.
The county recently received a grant from DEO to look at our community rating system, which is the flood program that we have for the county. And depending on the actions that the county takes, people who are in flood zones get breaks on their flood insurance. And one of the things, we are going to be reassessing that whole program to try to get better rates for the county. And one of the things that we should be getting credit for are regulations above FEMA's minimum requirements. So that's one of the concerns that we've expressed, staff has to the board, about the changes to getting rid of the wetland buffers could possibly affect that, the county's ratings. Now, we won't know until we actually do the full assessment, but that is something that you can get points for.
What is it like for you to hear all this? What is it like for you to hear all this? What is your responsibility from this thus far?
Well, I think there's a great deal of concern. I mean, based on what I'm hearing, and I mean, it sounds like we've got a lot of very interested community and citizens. You know, from a state standpoint of what our rule regulates, we have our regulations, we have our statutes, and then you have all your local cities and counties can have their own. They can be either more or less. I mean, it's all over the place across the state. So, you know, with the variability, that's what you run into.
Can you speak louder, please?
We're not earlier.
Lots of old people here.
Sure. Yeah, too many old people.
I will repeat. Sorry, I apologize for that. No, I mean, I definitely hear the concern, and as we navigate through, you have state rules, you have state statutes that we are bound by from where I am located, and then each of these different cities and counties can have their own statute, or not statute, but they have their own rules and regulations that can be more stringent or they can be looser. We know across the district that we have here in Northwest, some are more stringent, some are less. And that there is that latitude. So, it's interesting to hear some of the different perspectives that I'm hearing right now.
This next question. Is it not true the state can permit, does everybody see it? It's the second question down. Everybody see it? Is it not true the state can permit a private owner to fill a water body because the state holds sovereignty over all land, water, and water bottoms within its boundary? But the private owner cannot give himself permission because he holds property, not sovereignty. If this is true, would you say that those who assert that any wetlands regulations are a violation of property rights may be fundamentally confusing property with sovereignty?
I'll have a go at it.
Wasn't my question.
In the first, right up front, the state does not hold sovereignty over all land, water, and water bodies within its boundary. The state, by virtue of statehood, owned at the time we became a state, 1849 or so, owned all of these submerged lands under tidal or navigable water bodies. They also owned what were called swamp and overflowed lands. For the first 100 years or so of statehood, the state frantically tried to get rid of as much of that property as they could. The state managed to get rid of almost all swamp and overflowed lands, deeded out a good bit of the submerged lands like the bottom of the Gulf, the bottom of the St. Marks River. We had quaint court decisions inflicted on us. Many of you in the room may or may not know that the Wakulla River is not a navigable river. Thank you, Ed Paul. You cannot run a boat up the Wakulla River because it's not navigable. That's why the fence is still there. So, the state has sovereign ownership of what is left of those submerged lands. Uplands and wetlands are not, never were, subject to sovereignty. The state has police powers over private property. The permitting programs are administered under the state's police powers to protect basically all the citizens. To give you an example, if you're downhill from me, it's in, or anybody that's downhill from me, it's in their interest that I not be allowed to flood you sinus deep in water because I paved all my property over, any more than it is to speed on the highway. So regulation of activities in uplands and wetlands is a police power issue. When you intrude past the wetland area into state-owned land, now you're using property that, quite candidly, doesn't belong to you. It belongs to all the citizens of the state of Florida, and you're asking the landowner, the state, for permission to use that property. Now, have I confused you at a higher level?
Just something that clarified to me, in case people aren't from a navigable water, you can take a canoe up it or a kayak, it's navigable. and it belongs to everybody. And something that has come up to contention is in floodplains. And I remember this in graduate school when the Wakulla River flooded. I'm going up there in Sutton's Lake Park to look at incredible 20-foot-high cypress knees. And that property is owned by someone. Well, when it's flooded, you can take a boat into it. And so I know that there was contentious issues. And
The term of art is navigable by the ordinary and customary means of commerce at the time of statehood. That included pirogues and canoes, and there's an awful lot of litigation over whether various water bodies were in fact navigable at the time of statehood. We have a whole section at DEP that does nothing but deal with submerged lands ownership issues. And I won't even try to get into Spanish land grants. That's a whole other.
Let's go down to this question 4 here. With over 2/3 of our county already protected in a state or federal park, why do some people believe we should try to protect isolated wetlands with these additional guidelines?
I'll be glad to answer that. As I mentioned before, wetlands serve as recharge zones for the Florida aquifer. And so isolated wetlands are incredibly important. Not only that, but there are certain species that may not be on people's radar, but they are part of the food chain, whether it's salamanders or different frog species. And they use these isolated wetlands to actually reproduce. Often they have to lay their eggs in different type of wet habitats. And isolated wetlands will sometimes only exist for certain months out of the year. And so it's really important to have these if you want to keep up the wildlife health. And you got to think there's a food chain, and so there's a good possibility when the disappearance of a small salamander or frog that will continue up the chain and will affect other wildlife. So it's really important to keep these isolated wetlands. In addition, one of the largest groups that lobbies for the protection of wetlands is a group that should be really familiar up here in Wakulla County. It's Ducks Unlimited. It's actually one of the largest hunting organizations in the nation. They lobby, and they lobby for the protection of wetlands, specifically for wildlife habitat, so they can keep up with the duck hunting. And I know that hunting and wildlife attraction is something that's very big here in Wakulla County. So it's definitely in your best interest to have these type of things so these type of waterfowl can continue to come here.
Let's keep going down this. Yes, please.
I was just going to add real quick, I can't speak to anything at the county level, but I can speak to the state side of it, whereas prior to 2010, the state did not have isolated wetland regulations. But as of November 1st, isolated wetlands of 2010 became regulated. They became jurisdictional, and they now fall under our regulations. So in the past, where that was not under our purview, that has changed, and it's been that way under the new rule that went into effect 2010, as well as the one that goes into effect, the new rule October 1st. So just wanted to add that for the group on the state side.
Can you tell us what the new rule
Yeah,
is?
what's the rule?
It's 62.330 is the new rule. It's statewide ERP rule. Right now, we currently have ERP for Northwest District, which includes these 16 counties, and it has been in effect since November 1st, 2010. Phase 2 has. And the new rule, which is basically a consolidation of all of the rules across the state, and it goes into effect October 1st.
So what's different about it?
I'll tell you, for Northwest District's perspective, there is not a whole lot of change whatsoever, because ours was the last rule that was implemented in 2010. See, prior to that, we were much different from the rest of the state in terms of what our rule was. It was, let's just say, it was all over the place. It was very, very generalized, very vague under 62-25 and 62.312. So that came in line in 2007 for Phase 1 of ERP, and in 2010 for Phase 2. The biggest difference, the isolated wetland is still a component of the new rule. It basically is getting all the different districts aligned, whereas Northwest District has this rule and an application, and every other district you go to has a different rule, different application. This just consolidates them and gets them all in the same rule and same application.
Is it that?
Tell us how to find
Yes.
that.
I
this
can't-
right here?
That is, well,
This says Phase 2.
that is Phase 2. That's what the current rule is today. The new one goes into effect October 1st, and it's available online. It's available on the website.
So the website to find this, is that where people could go to find information?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll be glad to.
And
leave this somewhere?
Sure.
Or whatnot?
Just to give you hopefully a quick thumbnail sketch. Prior to about 1994, you had a water management district programs regulating stormwater, DEP regulating dredge and fill, but not in isolated wetlands, DNR running the state-owned submerged lands program. In the 93-94 time frame, DER got renamed and was told to develop with the water management districts the environmental resource permitting program to merge stormwater, dredge and fill, and the sovereign submerged lands review process under the ERP permit, except for our good friends in Northwest Florida.
Correct.
Who were grandfathered out and suffered along with the ERP doing dredge and fill and stormwater and having to get a separate state-owned submerged lands approval. The Water Management District pretty much didn't do much in the way of permitting except ag and silviculture. The legislature kept extending the grandfathering. I won't bore you with why the Water Management District is chronically broke and the misplaced decimal on the ad valorem taxes. That's a whole other story.
And actually, I would like for you to tell that story because
Okay,
it underscores why it is so important that local governments in this part of the state need to step up our protections. Our water management district in North Florida is the poorest district, and I'll let you pick up on exactly why.
The story is, back when the water management districts were created, 4 of the 5 districts got a constitutional cap on their millage of 1 mil. Theoretically, Northwest Florida was supposed to be capped at half of that, and they misplaced the decimal, and they got capped at 0.05 mil. So instead of $1, they got capped at a nickel. Or $1 instead of being capped at 50 cents, they got capped at a nickel. 1/20th of the other
What this
resources.
means is this comes out of property. So if $1 of every property value is given to a water management district, you can imagine how wealthy the more populated parts of the state are. Not only are we the least underpopulated part of the state, so we have less taxable property tax dollars, but we have a pittance compared to what the rest of the state gets, which is why it's so important these local governments here in Northwest Florida step up and continue because the demands are not being met. It's too much on the Northwest Florida Water Management District. They don't have the money. They aren't able to hire the people to follow these regulations. So it's very important that counties here, if we care about our property, that we step up to the plate.
And just to finish that thumbnail, in roughly 05, the grandfathering was repealed. We in the Water Management District were told to do a rule for Northwest Florida in 2 phases.
I'm sorry, can you all hear him back there?
Dredge and fill second.
Can you all hear?
That's been in effect now since 2010. The current rulemaking is really just fine-tuning, making things a bit more uniform statewide in terms of fees, application forms, some general permits, and a few other things. Really no huge change. Things are different in Northwest.
Decimal point's still in the wrong place?
Decimal point's still in the wrong place.
It is, and sadly, because it's a legislative issue, I think it's
Actually, it's a constitutional
or
issue.
constitutional 3/4 of our legislature to overturn it, or I mean, a near